You think you know me.
Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Getting ready for one big last project I got to do before my road trip to VAM 25 on my Super Chief Limited. We're going to be replacing the stock handlebars on there that I've complained about them during my demo ride. I'm finally going to start doing something about it today. We're going to replace those with these. These are the Indian mini Apes that I got from Indian. Got a deal on those. I also have the wiring kit, extended wiring kit, and the clutch cables and everything that comes in that kit. And I'm going with Avon grips. I had Avon grips on my Indian Scout 60 and I refused to ride with anything else. These things just have a great grip to them. They have a very nice soft feel. They're definitely better than the stock grips that came on the Super Chief Limited. Those things are like grabbing onto the handlebars themselves, basically. They have good grip to them, but honestly, they're hard as a rock. All right, the hardest part about this project on these newer bikes is you got all the wiring stuff to do. So basically, it's almost like you're tearing down the complete top half of the motorcycle. You have to take the seats off. You have to take this trim piece off on the Super Chief Limited because the GPS puck is underneath this trim piece here that goes to the ride command. And of course there's wiring inside the handlebars for both sides, and of course the tank has to come off because the wiring plugs in back here underneath the tank. It's just a lot of tear down. I'm going to take the windshield off too. That's probably not 100% necessary to do. It's just going to make the job a lot easier to tear it apart. All right, step one, take the seat off. Stock seat, you're just going to need a 6mm. I have the Mustang seat, so I have to use a 6 and a 5 to take those off. All right, next step, I'm going to remove the mirrors and the Memphis shade handguards using a 17mm wrench. Next step is going to be to remove the trim piece with a 5mm Allen wrench. All right, the next step is going to be to remove this puck from your trim piece and set it aside. There's 4 prongs on here. You just have to gently push them out of the way and pull the piece out. Set the trim piece aside and you'll have to hang the puck out of the way somewhere where it won't get in the way. Next step is a 5mm wrench, and we're going to take the coil cover off. That way we can get to the wiring and the gas lines underneath the tank. All right, folks, this next part, there's a hose right there that has a mark on it. You can see that is your fuel line that goes to the fuel rail. What you want to do, there's 2 gray tabs, and all you do is you take your fingers and you squeeze them apart. Not sure I can get that on camera, but it's right here. Not hard to miss. Like I said, mine is marked actually with a blue line from the factory or the dealership, whoever did that. But that, you just squeeze it with your 2 fingers and pull it off. You might want to stuff a rag down in there just to keep gas from getting down on your engine. All right, now the 2 10mm bolts are out. I dropped the 2 brackets down. All they do is literally roll down forward. You're going to pull the tank a little bit forward. There's not a lot of room to work up here, so we're going to pull it forward just to get it loose so we can lift it up a little bit. There's a wire connector on this side that pinches and you will pull it. All right, folks, that's that wire harness you have to disconnect from the tank before you can pull the tank off right there. You can kind of see it. Not the green hose, that's there, but right here. I got the tank sitting on a board right now, so I don't want to push on it too much, but I got to get both hands up in there and pull that out. All right, folks, now that that's disconnected, the last thing we got to do, there's a vent hose here at the back of the tank. We simply just pull that off and then we remove the tank and set the tank aside. All right, the next part, folks, we're going to be removing the clutch cable. You're going to need a 10mm socket there to pull the harness or the holding bracket off there. And you're going to need a 12mm wrench to loosen this up and pull the cable off from down below. Basically what you're doing, folks, is just getting this cable loose enough so you can back that all the way out, and then you can get the little end piece off there. Say this bike's still brand new, so the cable's still got a lot of play in it, but this will move out of the way, and that piece comes out, and then we can just take the nut off the rest of the way. We'll pull it up and pull the cable out all the way up to the top. Basically, once this cable is disconnected on the bottom, you should be able to push this piece down and then pull it out of the connector. Actually, pull it out of the connector. Oops. Pull it out of the connector this way, pull the cable forward, drop it down, and all you have to do is run it back up through and set it aside. You won't be using this again. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to loosen up your clutch cable, or your clutch first. You can't take this all the way off because there's actually a cable that's connected to this. That helps, you know, with shutting the Jeep, the cruise control and stuff off. So there's a wire in here. What you have to do first, after you loosen it up, just to get it out of the way, is take these T20 bolts out, and you're just taking this cover off so you can get to the wire and unplug the wire. In order to remove your clutch handle, you're going to have to pull this wire harness here first, and then there's another T20 fitting behind there to get the controller off. But that's how you're going to be able to disconnect this from the bike. You're going to need one of these tiny little poker tool things to push that hole and pull the harness out. You'll notice too, folks, I have the screws out. There's a pin that puts these into place and holds them there before you separate it, so it's not going to necessarily just fall off when you take those screws out. But we have to try to get all this in here without everything falling apart, so that's why you want to leave this kind of loose and out of the way. We're going to pull that out, take the little poker tool and poke the hole to separate the wiring. Getting this on camera is probably not going to be the easiest, but just be very careful because all this wiring is together on this unit, and you're not going to want to have to replace this. See, there's a pin that was holding that, and if you can see this, there's a little one of those holes there. Again, you're going to poke that, pull this off, and then you can pull your controls and that off. See, just carefully push that out. And you're all right, the next thing we're going to want to do is get the controls and the brake lever off on that side. This is where you're going to have a little caution. Brake fluid is very corrosive, so it will eat any paint it touches if you don't clean it up right away. If you have the tool to suck the fluid out from the top, do it. Anything will work, even like a turkey baster or whatever. I am going to come down here and open this up and drain it into a bucket and basically pump it out the best I can without it going all over my fender and my paint into this bucket, and we're going to dispose of it properly. We're going to need to loosen this banjo bolt here. Okay, basically what I'm doing, folks, is I got this bucket here underneath. We're not going to be actually removing this lower part of the brake cable. This is actually going to go back up there. There's another bolt we have to release. So right now I just want to release as much of the brake fluid as I can get out of there. I'm pumping the lever right now and squeezing out as much as I can get out, but I'm just going to continue to pump this until there's no fluid left coming out, and then I'm going to reconnect the banjo bolt. It's 10mm, by the way. All right, folks, this is the other end of the hose that we're actually going to be replacing in between the frame here in front of the engine. We're going to actually be removing that section of hose all the way up to the handlebar. I should have all the fluid out, at least as much as I can, but I still put a couple rags down here. We're going to be disconnecting. This is your brake switch. I'm going to leave it connected for now. See if I can actually work around without taking that out of there. I'm going to be using a 14mm wrench to loosen that up, and then we can go up top and use your 5mm to take the brake right off there, and then I'll just disassemble the cable from the top once I get up there. Again, folks, make sure you have some rags here. There's not a lot of room to work either, so if you've got a stubby wrench, it might be easier to get in here. You can get it from the bottom too. But there are 2 O-rings here. The brake kit comes with new O-rings for the top cable, so you definitely want to use those. Try to get in here with the wrench the best I can. I can even come from the other side maybe. I just got to get it loosened up enough to where I can get it off with my finger. Probably want to take one of the rags and wrap it around the end. Hopefully you can see this. Not a lot of room to work in there. Again, it might be easier to take the side off and pull the switch, but for now I'm just going to loosen that, pull that out of there, set it on top of the rag. My O-rings did come off, crush washers. Again, we're just going to take the brake cable, wrap it with this rag to keep more fluid from coming out. We have to try to push this back up toward the front. Yeah, you'll have to work your way around some of the holes for the lower part of the brakes. This is why you want to have as much of this bled out as you can. Now we take our 5mm and we pull our brake lever and reservoir off. There's no wires attached to that, which I'm surprised, but I think everything's attached down there for your cruise control and everything. You need your T20 Torx bit again. You're going to be taking the cover off first. Again, this, be very careful with your covers. You can buy replacement covers. A lot of people replace these with like chrome covers and stuff. These are just plastic though. So I'm going to remove this cover and then we'll get to the inside. You're going to loosen these two bolts again, screws, T20. I wish I could get this on camera better, kind of working in a small shed and it's raining outside, so I planned on doing this over a couple days. So pull this apart gently just to get it loose. Actually, once you loosen it up, your grip will come right off, your throttle grip. You have to get this part unplugged. Let's see. Very carefully, folks. Again, it's your little tool. This is kind of sealed up, but take that tool, poke down in there and push out. There. That one just pulls out. And this is when I like to take pictures too, because you got to be able to run the new wiring and make sure you run the wiring the right way through the handlebars. So when you get everything taken apart, take pictures of it as you're working. Right, what you're going to need to do now to get this throttle tube out, there's a connector inside here that we have to get moved forward so we can pull it out. So you're going to have to try and give yourself some slack on this end, kind of shove it up in there a little bit. Or if you wanted to, really, you could wait toward the end until we get everything disconnected and just kind of take it with us and plug in the new one once we get it out of there. But I'm going to try and loosen all this stuff up and then drag it out so I can disconnect that. You can see it in there, folks, after I've kind of wiggled it around a little bit, kind of pull on the wiring. I'm not reusing this wiring. We do have to reuse the sleeve, so that's what you want to get to there. You want to get it out so you can actually pull it down and use your little poker tool to disconnect. All right, folks, this takes a little bit of time, but I just had to get it loose enough where I can get my tool in there and just pop that loose. I'm using another tool just to hold it into the spot, because that's all I got to do to get the sleeve out is just loosen that up. We're not using any of this wiring again. We're just using this part here. So you're going to need to be careful with your connector on this. All right, what we're going to be doing now is we're getting ready to disconnect the wires. We're going to need to release these two little holder bag strap things. If you have one of these tools, that's the best way to do it, because you're going to reuse this again. But we got to get both of these out of there, and then we got to disconnect the wires. The harnesses you're trying to get to are actually completely wrapped. This is just Velcro wrapped around there, folks. I'm just moving that out of the way and setting it there, and we have to get to the main harness, which I believe is that one right there. All right, this is on the new harness, but that's what you're removing to reconnect. There is these three connectors here. There's a white one, a small black one, and a bigger black one there. The, what is it, 6-prong? But this is on the new harness. You need your little poker tools here. I got the flathead screwdriver this time. The white one here, push in and out like that. We got one disconnected. All right, on the little connector, again, you're going to need your little prick tool just to kind of push them down in there and pull that apart. That's the two small ones. And for the large harness, folks, you're not going to even need a tool. You just push on this lever here, and that pulls out. And now what we need to do is basically feed this all through the best we can. It's probably going to be a pain in the ass. I probably should have taken that piece off to get it out of the way. I may still have to, but we're going to have to fish these three wires out and somehow get everything through that little holder piece there. I hate that thing. It's kind of a pain in the ass. I still have the clutch cable in there. I may have to take it off entirely just to get all those things wired through. All right, folks, now that I got those two wires out of the way, it is probably easier to run them back through from the handlebars and get them through here, but I did get them out of the way. Actually, push on this harness. This is how I'm getting the clutch cable out. Push on this harness now that the other two wires are out of the way, and it makes a lot more room. I also loosened that up, that connector a little bit with a 10mm the last part of the teardown is to take the handlebars off. I am trying my best to leave the speedometer wired up. I'm going to probably have to set it down somewhere softly, like maybe down on the lights if the wiring's long enough. But there's 4 6mm Allen screws, 2 on the top and then 2 on the bottom. I'd loosen the two on the top, so it's a lot easier to loosen the ones on the bottom afterwards. All right, next I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison of the old brake cable and clutch cable with the new ones. This cable for the extended kit is actually like 6 inches longer, which is weird because I'm going to 8-inch taller bars, but that's what they had in the kit, folks. Hopefully they don't want you to have too much in there. You definitely would have to have a different cable if you want even taller than what I did. This cable, and this is within a few centimeters, folks. This cable is actually only like 3 inches longer, maybe 4. That's it, man. I'm going a lot taller bars, but again, though, like I said, there isn't as much pullback on them, and I think that's what they take into consideration. All right, folks, welcome back. We're getting ready to do the install today. So far, what I've done is I put the bars on just to get an idea what they're going to look like. I think they're going to be great. I put the brake cable from the extended kit in there just to kind of make sure it was going to be long enough. It was kind of weird that it was only 3 or 4 inches longer, and I've already run the clutch cable just to check that too. I know this came directly from Indian and this is the long kit. I wanted to make sure they didn't put the wrong parts in there, but this is going to be great. These bars are actually going to make me very happy. My back's going to be very happy. So now what we got to do is we're going to be running the wire. This part was trying to get the harness from here out through there. So I did take the 10mm bolt out of here. So it gave me a little bit more room, and like I said, it's easier to get the clutch cable in there if you kind of work this one around and slide it through. So now that the clutch cable's in there, I don't have to worry about that till later. All right, folks, what I'm attempting to do here now, I'm going to actually try to wire it up from the bottom, then up to the handlebars. I end up taking painter's tape over the connectors to protect them. I fed them in here up through the center of the frame. That's where it's really tough to get it through there. I'll take this off, I'll run it up through there, and I'm going to see if I can feed it through the handle. It's definitely easier to get this wire in here behind this holder if you have it detached. There's just not a lot of room in there. Not sure why you couldn't run the wiring actually on the other side, but I know Indian likes to run all the wiring down one side. I really don't know why it would make a difference that I couldn't run it on that side where my brake cable is, because I know it would still go up in there, and lengthwise it's not really going to make a difference because you're just moving from one side to the other. All right, folks, just to get that back on there, that's kind of a pain in the ass, but to run the wire through you have to take it off, unfortunately. I opted to take the speedometer off and set it here, and I got my handlebars on. I'm going to try and do now and make it a little easier for myself is to run the wires through this way. And then once I get them kind of started where I need them to go, I can put this back on. And remember, this is your throttle side, so that will have to go in very carefully that way. And they're actually sliding pretty easily. You just want to get it far enough to where you can grab a hold of the throttle piece on that side. And then again, I got that one started. I will start this side now down to the clutch side. Just feed it down in there. With the rounded angle of the handlebars, this is a lot easier to do. All right, now that I've got them started through the holes, I'm actually going to need a little bit more wiring to come up out of there. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to stand the handlebars up so I can get to the throttle piece here. Make sure when you're running the wire too, you're not just yanking on the ends. Actually try to feed it from both ends, but since I have the bars up like this, I have to stand them up now so I have a little bit more room to work. All right, when you're feeding the wire too, make sure, like I said, you're not just yanking on this end, and try to feed it up through the bottom the best you can. I don't have it connected down underneath where it sits under the tank yet. I needed that extra space. You feed your throttle tube in. As I said, there's not a lot of room to work, so you can feed your throttle tube in all the way. Be careful with that. They only go on one way because they do notch them to the handlebars. And once you get this connected like that, your throttle's connected, you can actually pull this back out and feed that back in there. And then once it's fed back in there, throttle tube back in there, there's a little tape on this end piece, so I can probably get it fed back in there a little bit better afterwards once I get the other wires kind of straightened out, but you get the idea. All right, now that I got those where I want them to be until I get them attached to the controller, I'm going to make sure I attach this end now, the 3 wiring harnesses, because I don't want to forget later on after I put the gas tank. And once you have your 3 plugs plugged together. You can put your protective retaining wire holders things back on. You can still move wiring around and stuff. I'm just trying to repeat doing this stuff again. That way I don't forget later on down the road. All right, now that we have all the wiring secured and basically where we want it, I did go ahead and tighten down my bars, kind of where I think I'm gonna want them. I'll adjust them later once everything's back together. Really not that hard to do with the 6mm wrench. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put the left-hand control on here. The left-hand control actually will line up with that hole on there. The one difference is on the Indian grip, they usually have a little thing too, like you put your grip back on there and it would align with that. I am using the Avon grip, so I no longer have the alignment for right there. That's why I'm not doing the grip first, because normally you would probably put the grip back on and then align it with that. I'm not doing that. This one will actually just go on later with some glue, and then I'll tighten it down with these. Again, folks, we're going to take the controller. Not a controller. It's not a video game controller. And move our wiring out of the way. Like I said, there's a little notch right there that this should go right onto it. Now that we got that in there, we're going to put the T20 screws in there to hold it on to the handlebars. Get everything lined up. Make sure your wires aren't pinched in there at all. And then what we'll do next is I'll get the clutch lever and put that on here and get that plugged in and kind of tighten down where I think I'm going to want it. But just making sure that my wires are not pinched in here in any way. Folks, remember, the bottom one in the back is for the clutch. That one pushes in. We push the main harness into this one, and the white one for the heated grips actually just gets tucked in here. We're not using it, so it just gets tucked in there. Now we'll get our clutch handle lined up basically where we want it, and we'll tighten it down for now. Again, we'll be able to adjust all this stuff later after the bike is. Before we get the clutch actually on there all the way, I'm gonna have to get this cover back on, and then once we get the cover on, we can move this over all the way and tighten it down. Remember, this is all plastic, so you got to be careful with it. Everything should pretty much snap in together though, like a glove. And then we'll get the back side in. Remember, that's got the switch button on it too, so then once this is actually in there, we're gonna, we want to make sure we don't pinch any of these wires. The clutch wire is kind of in the way right now, so for sure. This is the T20 screws that we're reinstalling to hold the cover on. Once all the pieces are kind of snapped in there together, you can move your clutch over to wherever you want it at this point. Then you don't need to tighten these down too much, they will crack. Okay, real quick folks, I'm going to run the clutch cable where I need it to run. So just to get it out of the way, I will adjust it later on. But basically that pulls in like that. Then you just pull it over and, oops. Then you just kind of slide your cable down in there to kind of hold it in the place for now. All right, next thing I'm going to do, folks, I'm going to put this back in the cable holder. It just snaps back in there. And then you take your 10mm bolt and it clamps down in there. And you just secure it to the frame again. And then I'll show you, the line will run down the frame right here, past your controls, and down underneath right here. All right, folks, remember we slide that in there. Everything's nice and loose. We get the connector back in there. Might have to loosen this up a little bit, slide it forward a little bit. That nut's got to go back on there like that. This is how you make your adjustment later on. Just get that on there for now, just so it kind of holds it in place. And then get your cable connected in there. Yeah, and just, you'll pull that back, and this is how you'll make your adjustment for the clutch later on. Just get everything kind of snugged in place for now, just so it holds it. For now, since I don't have any patience and I want to see what they look like on there, I'm going to put my clutch side grip on there. I'm using some Pro Taper glue. You shouldn't need to use too much, but these have a taper system too, so when they go on they get tighter. but I'm still going to glue them on there pretty good because you definitely don't want these to move. And then when you're done, like I said, they have these small little Allen keys that tighten down on the bar. So these are extra secure. Like I said, these are my favorite grips. I had them on my Scout 60. Kind of got in there. This stuff likes to set up really quick, so you want to get this on there as quick as possible. Like I said, there is kind of a taper, so, and that's on there as far as they're going to go. You're butted up actually right against the control, so really it's not bad. It just doesn't go inside the control anymore like on the original. All right, now that it's attached, we're going to take the smaller of the two harnesses, the two plugs, and that goes back in the small lower hole, and of course the big one goes in the front. And make sure you have your little tab there. Make sure that snaps in good. It clicked in there good. And of course the white one again is just for heated grips, which we're not doing, so we're not using that one on this one. Again, you just put this on over the top of your buttons. Remember, these are plastic. They shouldn't have to be forced on there. If you're doing it the right way, everything should fit together pretty easily. And then your T20 screws will go back in there again. And it looks nice. The grips actually look factory. I always like these Avon grips. I had them on my Scout 60. They work great. On the Scout 60, they were nice because they had their own throttle tube in there, so you didn't have to try to reuse the factory throttle tube. Basically, what holds your throttle grip on the bike is actually the control on this side. There's no sleeve like the last time. It's just the throttle tube that's actually inside the handlebar that's connected to the wiring. I don't know if they do that on the new Scouts or not, because I know the new Scouts have cruise control and stuff, so they may have changed all that. There's a lot of similar things, like the ride command and everything's pretty much the same as what's on the Chief if you get that, the 2025s. I'd have to look into that sometime. I'd like to have another Scout again eventually. And on the Avon grips, even though they got these little Allen keys, this is the one side we don't actually do anything with those. That's actually just a look, so it matches that side. That side there you do tighten down. I think it's just a precaution, folks. It is glued on there pretty good. I glued it the last time I worked on it. Make sure your throttle moves freely. Everything seems to be engaging good. You can turn it forward too for the cylinder deactivation, and I use that to shut off my cruise control. What we're going to do now is we're going to put the brake lever back on. A little bit of brake fluid is still coming out the other end, like I said, so I've got a rag wrapped around it and I ran the line. I did tighten down this end of the banjo for now, just to keep from getting leakage. We'll have to make sure we have the best route ran for the brake line before we attach the other end. But I want to get the brake lever on here now, so get your lever pretty much situated to where you think you're going to want it. Tighten it down, adjust it, and then we'll adjust the angle of the hose for the most part. That's a 10mm socket. Just try to get it started in there. Probably would have been easier for me to take the sensor off initially to do this. Oops. But I didn't want to do that. Alright folks, I have the lines ran and tightened down. This is the appropriate way to do it. Nice thing about this setup from the original setup on the Super Chief, my brake cable always used to touch the gas tank whenever I had it fully turned toward that direction. So now I don't have to worry about that. The cable's actually in front of the bars like any other bike I've ever had, and it's secured by that. And down there, it actually comes through the front of the frame. Took me a minute to get that straightened out. All right, now for the least favorite part of my job is bleeding the front brakes. I don't have a vacuum bleeder, so I have to do it the manual method. So what you're going to need is a Phillips head screwdriver so you can take the top off. Obviously some DOT4 brake fluid and a dispensary for the air bubbles and the fluid that's going to be leaking out. I used a beer bottle and a couple of hoses that I had for doing fluid exchanges. Let's get started on that. Okay, I've removed the top, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some brake fluid to it. Again, be careful. Fill it up most of the way, but not all the way, because what we're going to be doing is trying to pump the air out of the lines once we do this. This would be easier with 2 people, especially with having the ape hangers on here now. But what I'm doing is I'm squeezing the brake lever carefully, and while I still have it squeezed, I take my 10mm wrench, I turn it, you'll see a bunch of air bubbles come out, and then you close it, let your brake lever loose, again, squeeze it, open it up, you'll see more air bubbles coming out. This might take a while since this is a brand new line we're trying to fill. And close it, open it up, squeeze the lever, open again. It's just you keep going until there's absolutely no air bubbles left in the system and you have nothing but plain fluid coming through there. All right, we pumped through here till there was absolutely no air bubbles coming out and we had pressure. Now what I'm going to do is top this off with a little bit more DOT4 and we'll reassemble it. All right, brakes should be pretty good for now. Make sure when you reseal this, nothing is leaking out. Have it tightened down the right way with the gasket and everything. Check your connections to make sure nothing's leaking. Remember, we're going to do the gas tank next. We have the vent hose. We have the connection. I believe that's for the sending unit, maybe the fuel injection. I don't know. But that's, and then your hose that's already attached to the tank is going to go on there. Let's get it on there now. And then after that, we'll have the 2 clamps that go over top of this. Getting close. All right, what I'm trying to do first, because the tank's actually going to have to get pushed forward. It gets hooked on the frame back here. But before I get it pushed forward, I'm going to put the vent hose on first. I think while everything's loose, it might be easier for me to work my hands up in there and get everything reattached. Remember, kind of doing it opposite of what we did before. Vent hose went on pretty easy. Now I think what I'll go ahead and do is the fuel line next. Get the fuel line on there. That just pushes on and snaps. Fuel line is on there now. I can get rid of the rag. I no longer need that. And then finally what I'm going to do is trying to find where that harness was again, where it plugs in. It goes right in. Sorry you can't actually see what I'm doing. Like I said, it's hard to get the camera angles on here, folks. But it goes right next to where the fuel line is to the tank. This is why I think it's easier to get this done now before I even put it into place like I had it earlier. And then we just snap that line in. Once we get it onto the 2 rubber mounts, we just push it forward. And then that's all we have left is the 2 clamps with the 10mm nut on the front, or bolt, sorry. And then once your 2 clamps are secure with the 10mm bolts, next up is your coil cover with the 5mm Allen wrench. All right, next step, of course, we're going to put our trim piece back in. Make sure you put your GPS puck up the right direction. So this will be the top when you put it in there, and then when you flip it, this is the side that faces the sky. Let's snap this back in, put our trim piece back. And of course, lastly, folks, we're going to put the seat on. Yes, we still have the windshield to do, but I'm not going to put the windshield on until after I've taken this out for a ride and checked it. But remember, it's just the 2 5mm bolts that hold it onto the spools. That's it. Handlebars installed. We're going to go do a little demo ride on it and then make our own adjustments. That, of course, is going to come up to the rider themselves. All right, thank you, folks. Probably a really long video. Sorry I couldn't get everything exactly on camera, but I tried to describe it to the best of my ability. Thanks for watching. I got a trip coming up. Let me get this thing out for a demo ride and check everything out. Bye for now.